Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I just thought this was so timely and so important, because I feel like as we're doing the inner child work, right? And I just really want to take some time to just acknowledge all of the young folks out there. I'm talking about like early 20s, those of you who have had to move out of your parents' house at 18, right? I still don't agree with that. I just think that the pressure to be an adult and to assume like adult-like responsibilities at the age of 18 is so crazy because you're such a child. I was going to say you're still a child, but you're such a child. You're not ready for that level of responsibility. And I'm so grateful that when I did move out, first of all, I moved out at 17, right? Graduated at 17. I stayed on a dorm. So I'm grateful that my first experiences were somewhat regulated and kind of like, you know what I mean? And I even think about just what a privilege it was to even have that experience in my life, to say I lived in a dorm. And, I took that route, right? And I just think about those, as I'm getting older, I think about how rich and full my life is of experiences. And, not to really veer, but I kind of want to talk about this just for a moment, because I think too often we're so quick to move on to accumulation, right? We're like, what's the next best thing? I know for me, that was just the way I lived my life. And it was really because I found so much of my self-worth in my accomplishments. So I was always looking for the next thing. And it just kind of got to a point in my life where I was so tired, because it's something about your conscience. It's something about your spirit, right? That God, you know what I mean? Resonating in you. And I think I just got to a point where I'm just like, I'm tired. I'm tired of you. I was so tired of doing so much for myself and bringing it back to myself, and me not feeling like it was enough. Me feeling like, okay, yeah, whatever, shrugging it off. You just get to a point where you're like, yo, I'm tired. I'm not about to keep doing stuff. If you know what I mean? I'm not about to keep going out here showing up and showing out, and you're not being appreciative of me, right? For me, it took some time, right? It took some time. And then I think that there are still moments when I grieve. I think I more so grieve the loss of it, right? The loss of what I didn't have. But I really can say that through the process of all of it, I have so much peace and solace, right? I have very unconventional parents. I used to joke and tell people all the time I was raised by wolves. I would joke and say that because my parents were very unconventional. And I'm so grateful because my dad raised me to be such a strong-minded person. And I feel like we would really get into a lot of arguments growing up because he was strong-minded and I was strong-minded, right? So during my adolescence, kind of like early 20 years, we really had a lot of disagreements because it was like, you're not going to say whatever you want to say to me. You know what I mean? And so we really had that because it was like, you raised me to be strong-minded like you, right? And I have an opinion. And my mom was this really cool, free-spirited kind of like mom. She wasn't super strict, but she allowed you to fly your wings. You know what I mean? She allowed you to find yourself. And I never had to sneak around. I never had to go behind my mother's back. I was never into all these different kind of things, because she always gave us that freedom to just kind of find ourselves. And she supported us throughout all of those phases. I think about my paramour phases. Yes, girl. I had a Paramore phase. I think about my Ed Sheeran phases. I think about my band phases, right? I listened to bands like He Is We, Green Day, The Fray, The Script. That was all of me, man. I freaking love those days. What a joy. I love my childhood. I really do, because I look back and I really had the best of both worlds. I would tell people that all the time. I'm like, my dad is this very much authoritative disciplinarian, right? And I say that and I look back on it and I realize that that's what men do, right? I think people wanted to obstruct and obliterate masculinity because men are so opposite from feminine, right? They're so opposite from being women. And I think that it was easy to make that more malleable for a lot of people to digest because it was a rarity, right? Having a father, having a disciplinarian, that's a rare thing. And I don't think we talk enough about it. There was someone at my job who, talked about how their She was a white woman, baby daddy, husband. I think it was a husband. But, he left and he moved to another country. And had I not worked the job I worked, I would have never heard stories like that, right? Unfortunately, too often the media really has a very keen ear to Blackness and fatherlessness within Black communities. Too often that is not a narrative that is really given or at least highlighted, right, in other communities. And so we don't realize its prevalence. And I just realized just the rarity of that. Like, not everyone grows up with a father. Not everyone grows up with having that disciplinarian, very much strong-minded, very much direction, I'm here to guide you. I'm here to lead this ship. I'm here to drive the boat, right? And I don't think people realize that. And I think when we look at the identity crisis that is going on within our current social sector now, right, we can very much see that so much of this is really rooted in fatherlessness. And I think what white privilege does is it excludes people, right? It excludes white people from having that sense of relatability. And I think because white privilege yields so much benefits, so many benefits, that I think that kind of like shying away from it and deconstructing that, right, and really unpacking that and talking about that would just be to what some may consider not relatable, right? And so I think that this is kind of why we have the cultural appropriation at large with TikTok culture, right? I've never seen so many people picking up on Black vernacular, Black mannerisms, Black customs. I mean, just the whole wanna be Black. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like it, like I do today. And I think because what they're really craving is this relatability. But because white privilege yields so many benefits, it's easier to kind of just stay in that state of comfort. It's easier to just kind of protect that versus talking about, I didn't have a dad either, right? Versus talking about, oh, we weren't this either, right? You know what I mean? It's just easier to kind of hide behind that because you'll always have that white privilege and it yields so many benefits versus really opening up the door and creating an actual genuine space for relation. Now, I'm not here to say we need to be out here creating trauma bonds. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to be out here relating based, solely on our hurts and our pains. But if you want to talk about race outside of the context of racism and you want to talk about how we are all quote unquote human beings, that's where we open the door to being human beings, right? That's the point of relation. It's not this, I don't even know where, I couldn't even tell you, that's what I was going to say. So it's not this cultural appropriation, trying to say you have Black friends, trying to appropriate or emulate really Black culture for relation, right? No, it's talking about what life experiences did you have that don't necessarily solely relate to deprivation and fatherlessness, but what are your experiences? You can really find a lot of these experiences on platforms like Reddit, and you know what I mean, where you can see people talking about how they grew up with a narcissistic father or a abusive mother or so forth. And Dr. Romney, her YouTube platform is filled with a lot of commentators who share those experiences. And it's really only in that context that we really find relation in terms of human beings. Outside of that, honey, there is no relation, right? White privilege is at the totem pole of white privilege is the epitome of American dream, right? And so it's when you try to come from that space, we're not listening. We don't hear you. We don't get it. There's no relation. So that's something to be said about that. But I wanted to just kind of talk about the narrative of just once you forgive your parents and you create a new story for yourself. And this isn't the same type of story that you create when you're young. Because you're no longer denying what is here and what is real, right? But you're healed enough to accept, right? There's really something said about acceptance. When I say forgiveness will set you free, oh baby, even just those words rolling off my tongue, I think about a bird in a cage and the cage being opened, right? Because the thing with forgiveness is that it really allows you to sit in such a space of acceptance. And like, forgiveness is this very beautiful process because there's grief, right? There's denial, there's anger, there's mourning, there is regret, there is loss, there's release, right? There is revenge sometimes, you know what I mean? Like vengefulness kind of comes up into that. Like there are just so many emotions to really process forgiveness. And because I really took the journey and I had the courage to sit with myself and forgive people in my life, the new narrative that it has afforded me is freedom. You know, it's freedom, and that doesn't change anything, right? That doesn't necessarily change anything on the external, but it changes something within me. You know what I mean? And I'm no longer bound by victimhood. I'm no longer bound by another person's actions, right? I'm not being triggered or set off, you know, for the most part, by someone else's actions. And there's just such a freedom in that. And I just think about the stories that I'm finding myself telling myself in terms of looking at the good aspects of what my life was, right? Looking at the good aspects of everything in my life. And I'm so grateful. And it's like, from that lens, from that new narrative that I've given myself, instead of the same story about who hurt me and X, Y, and Z, I have so much love to give. Because I not only do I understand, but it's almost like God will take all that hard-heartedness that you have towards a person and seriously use it to your good, to where it's like you have so much compassion. And see, this is why I think that it takes maturity, because too often, honey, there are so many people talking about what they would do, what they wouldn't do, giving advice for people in certain situations they never even been in. You ever met someone who is like, you ever met someone who was like privileged, right, in their own rights, right? And I don't want to get too much into specifics because privilege can be different for a lot of people. But let's say, for example, you meet someone who is privileged in the sense that they like live with a relative, right? And they telling you like, girl, you need to just da 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 da. You need to just da 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 da. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, that's not my life. That's not my story. I don't have the privilege of living with a relative, right? So like you telling me I need to be doing all this, but it's like, that's not my story. And this person who's trying to give this advice doesn't realize how immature this is in this situation, because it's like, you have privilege. You have a completely different set of circumstances, right? And I guess I'm using the word privilege to just kind of just keep it like very basic, but I don't think we realize that, one, everyone's life journey is different, but two, people's circumstances afford different things and different choices. And so to just kind of be always trying to tell someone what they should be doing, or always telling someone how they should do this, or how to, like, that's a sign of immaturity. So you got to kind of grow out of that and just learn when it's okay to just not say anything, and learn when it's okay to hold space for the people that you love or your friends or whatever. Learn to be compassionate, but also learn when to keep your mouth shut, because it's like, that's not your set of circumstances. Be blessed and be grateful for your portion and what God has given you, but realize that not everyone else has that portion. You know what I mean? Like, it's totally okay. But yeah, like, opposite side of that, coming to the full circle with forgiveness, it took a long time to get here. I definitely did not wake up here. I still find myself mourning and grieving, because I think just the inner child in me, like, she just wants that, but I'm okay. I'm okay. And being on the other side of it, I could just tell you guys, like, there's so much freedom in that. And the freedom comes from the accountability, the responsibility that you reclaim, right? That you no longer really feel victimized or at the mercy of another person. And that's really where your freedom lies, in forgiveness, right? And there's just really something said about that. And I remember, I don't know what book it was. It might have been Emotional Detox. But it could have been something else. Honey, I've read so many books, like, and I have this really bad habit sometimes, like, if it's not something that's like a favorite, if it's something that is like I've, breezed within, or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not really getting into the book. Sometimes I don't look at the author, but I remember there was this novel, that I was reading, and it just kind of talked about, it was a TED Talk. Y'all, this is me. But it was a TED Talk, and she basically said that if we wanted to be free or, forgive or move on with our lives, she was like, we have to be willing to tell ourselves a new story. And at the time, I was trying to factor in this story that I wanted to tell myself about the people that hurt me, but I couldn't be real with myself. Like, I didn't believe it. You know how you be saying affirmations, but you don't believe it. So it's just not hitting the same. And I could not adopt a new story. And in the moment, I'm like, okay, that sounds good or whatever. But it really took time. And now that I'm here today, it's like, I feel very grateful for every experience in my life. And that's not to negate, and that's not to be in denial, but I'm no longer allowing it to hold me back. Right? I can't think of who it was that said this, but it's like, don't be in denial about racism, but don't allow it to hold you back. And that's where I am with inner child healing and adulting and forgiveness, don't be in denial about who people are, but don't allow them to hold you back. And that's the gift of forgiveness, sincerely. And there's really something said about forgiving your parents. Some of us, we have these situations where we see our parents, or these it could be a lifetime, right? And our parents aren't anything that we would want to aspire to be, right? They made their mistakes and they are who they are, right? But we know that their imperfections are merely by choice. And so you find yourself in a space where you're feeling like, I don't want to end up like my parents and so forth. And I think so much of that is realizing that you're your own person. So I hope by me saying that and sharing my personal revelation, set someone free. Realize that you are your own person. You are not your parents. I think too often, if we're not aware, we get so caught in that, and we find ourselves being very perfectionistic because we don't want to make the same mistakes our parents made, especially in this healing culture where people say oh, you're going to marry your dad if your dad was X, Y, and Z. And we have to realize that our parents come with good and bad. And if you can get to that point where you can find the peace and the acceptance and the healing throughout that entire forgiveness process, then you'll start to see that I'm my own person. You know what I mean? Yes, these people made me. Yes, I've taken on certain things from these two people, but they're not all bad. And at the end of the day, I get to become my own person. I get to make my own choices. I get to become aware and learn and grow from my mistakes, And so I just kind of wanted to set someone free from the belief that you're going to be like your parent, or you're going to, you know what I mean? Because I just think too often some of us have seen that. We don't realize that we get to become our own person. You are now the hero of this story, okay? You are in the front seat. You are the person who's calling the shots. You are the person who is deciding when you're going to bed, period. You know what I mean? You, at this point, this is your future, and it's a bright one, and it's a beautiful one, and you get to decide where you're going from here, especially once you realize that you're not going to be like your parents, because you're going to be your own person, and you go through this healing process and everything. You're going to realize no, I'm my own person, and I get to decide what kind of life I want to have, regardless if I've made some of the mistakes that my parents have made, regardless if I picked up some of their bad habits or whatever the case may be. And the thing about 20s, I've learned to give myself so much grace, because I know for a fact I'm growing each year, and I've grown so much from the years before that for me personally, it's one of those things where it's I have such a profound sense of gratitude, and I have such a profound sense of grace and happiness, because I just feel like God has led me this far. I know that He won't leave me. You know what I mean? If I made it through all of that, I can only imagine how bright the future is going to be. So we're going to leave with a little prayer. And I just want to say, I just pray that God shows you how good it gets. Peace.